Are you exhausted by how stupid everyone seems to be? Like how people can still deny climate change, how they can vote for obvious authoritarians, how they can believe such obviously harmful bullshit? Well, what if I told you that your ability to see how harmful and partial these beliefs are is actually proof that you are on the cutting edge of human development worldwide and might actually be ready to make an evolutionary leap that only about 5% of humanity has made. In this leap, rather than seeing others as merely delusional, wrong, evil, or selfish, you start to see the developmental function behind every belief system, where you can understand exactly what stage of consciousness someone is expressing and why they need that particular worldview at that particular stage in their journey in order to make sense of reality. Where you can literally see yourself in them because you remember what it was once like for you to be at that stage. This gives you almost wizard-like abilities where you can predict their reactions, speak to everyone in their own developmental language so they actually hear you instead of getting defensive. You can stay centered and compassionate even when facing the most seemingly triggering beliefs, using all of these abilities to help heal the divisions that are fragmenting our world, bringing humanity towards greater unity, harmony, love, and wholeness. This consciousness is what many developmental theorists have called Tier 2 consciousness, and it is precisely this level of maturity that our species so direly needs more people stepping into if we're going to make it through the meta crisis that we are facing today. So before I can articulate what the human developmental theorists have called Tier 2, we first need to talk about what Tier 1 is, considering Tier 1 is what leads into Tier 2. And so Tier 1 refers to a level of psychological maturity and cognitive sophistication that approximately 95% of humanity is operating from. And while there's a lot of factors that go into describing what Tier 1 is, the very, very crux of it, the essence of it, is that Tier 1 believes that their worldview is the way, the correct way of seeing things. And so in their worldview, in their ideas of how to create a better world and just make life better, their mindset is basically, if everyone else just thought like me and the kinds of people that think similar to me, then the world would be this amazing, harmonious, and far more peaceful place. They genuinely believe that their way of making meaning, their values, their political views, their spiritual beliefs is the objectively right way to view reality. And so in our modern present-day sphere, there are three primary Tier 1 groups at play in the field. We're going to call these different groups the blue group, the orange group, and the green group. So the blue group represents traditional, religious in a more absolutistic sense, conservative consciousness. These are people who deeply value order, structure, absolute moral certainty, and belonging to something sacred and eternal. They're drawn to clear hierarchies, time-tested institutions, and belief systems that provide ultimate meaning and purpose. They see life through the lens of right and wrong, and us versus them. Their worldview is built around concepts like duty, honor, tradition, family, country, and God. These are the people who believe their religious system is objectively true and divinely ordained. You see a lot of fundamentalist Christians here, people who think society works best when everyone follows traditional gender roles and family structures, people who want strong borders, clear law and order, and a respect for the established authority. These people tend to be very patriotic and believe that their country and culture, and often their race too, is the best and worth defending. And they see rapid social change as very threatening and destabilizing. You see a lot of Trump supporters within this group. Essentially, the primary orientation here with the blue group is there is one right way to live, and that is ordained by God and tradition, and everybody should follow it. Now, the orange group is the group that values individual freedom, rational scientific thinking, personal achievement, innovation, and progress. They see life through the lens of problems to be solved, goals to be achieved, and systems to be optimized. Their worldview is built around concepts like merit, efficiency, technological progress, scientific progress, economic growth, financial profit, and personal responsibility. They typically believe that if everyone just embraced rational scientific thinking over religious superstition, worked hard to achieve their potential, let the best ideas win in the free capitalist markets, and use science and technology to solve the world's problems, then we'd have a beautiful, prosperous, free, advancing world. These are the people who see themselves as the rational, pragmatic, facts over feelings type of people who think those who are too emotional and sensitive or religiously superstitious are misguided. You see a lot of staunch scientific atheists due to the heavy emphasis on science. You also see a lot of people who believe that hard work and success should largely determine your life outcomes. There's a strong belief in the workings and goodness of capitalism here. Essentially, the primary view here is life is a game full of opportunities, and success comes to those who are smart enough and work hard enough in order to seize them. Are you seeing the modern day capitalist mindset in this? Now, the green group is the group that values inclusion, diversity, environmental sustainability, social justice, and systemic awareness. They see life through the lens of systems, power dynamics, intersectionality, and collective responsibility. Their worldview is built around concepts like equity, sustainability, community, consensus, and social justice. They believe that if everyone just recognized privilege and systemic oppression, embraced diversity, equity, and inclusion, were ecologically conscious and lived sustainably, and created equitable systems that honor all voices, then we'd have a just, sustainable, harmonious world. These are the types of people who think capitalism is fundamentally exploitative and unsustainable. They see racism, sexism, classism, and various other isms as serious issues in society and believe that dismantling these oppressive systems is absolutely essential. They typically view climate change as a very serious and very urgent moral crisis, and they typically believe that marginalized voices should be amplified when it comes to collective decision making. The primary view here is life is about creating justice and sustainability in a world that's been poisoned by oppression and greed. And so while these are all generalizations when it comes to the collective field, and by the way, no one individual is ever completely 100% in one category or group. They have different parts of themselves in different groups. I'm sure that you yourself see some part of yourself in the various different groups. But still, the conflict between these groups is what is causing a good amount of the chaos, a lot of the political polarization, the culture wars, and some of the other seemingly unsolvable problems that our species is facing right now. So in essence, blue believes that orange and green are deluded and bound to wind up in hell in the afterlife because they are not following the way of God. And they actively are deeply threatened by these groups because they see them as threatening their moral structure and their traditional values. Orange believes that blue is deluded and superstitious because their absolutistic beliefs are unscientific and irrational, and they see green as too sensitive, too emotional, and they see their desire for more collectivist, egalitarian values as threatening to their way of individualism and free market capitalism. All the while, green looks down on both blue and orange for being oppressive, bigoted, and destroying the biosphere. And so all of these groups believe that their way of thinking is the one correct way, and they think that if everyone else thought like me and behaved like me, then the world's problems would be fixed and we'd be living in this far happier, far more harmonious world. All those other people are just deluded and evil and wrong and are the reason that the world sucks. But there's actually harm in simply trying to make other people convert to your way of thinking because it doesn't actually work quite like that. And so what I haven't yet revealed, and this changes everything by the way, is that the blue, orange, and green groups are actually developmental stages. And none of the three groups realize that. None of the three groups realize that development is a real thing. Blue develops into orange, and orange develops into green, and then green actually develops into tier 2, which I'm close to getting into explaining. And by the way, I'm not making any of this up, like this isn't my own model that I made up. This is the field of developmental psychology that I'm speaking of. Authors such as Ken Wilber, Suzanne Cook-Greuter, Don Beck, Christopher Cohen, Claire Graves, and Robert Keegan are all a few names whose work you could check out to learn more about this stuff. But anyways, so I'd be willing to bet that you watching this probably most strongly identify with the green group. You may be able to see yourself in some of the other groups, but I'm willing to bet that if you've made it this far into the video, that you very strongly at least identify with green, and you probably identify with a good amount of orange as well. You're probably able to see that the earlier blue and the very early expression of orange, those groups represent a more fundamentally, a more partial, and a more fragmented worldview that perpetuates a lot more suffering onto the world than that of green. And if you're being honest with yourself, you probably do see blue and early orange as just a bit more unconscious than green because, hey, I mean, they voted an authoritarian into office, into America. And the way of thinking of these groups is actively destroying the biosphere, right? And maybe if you're being really honest with yourself, you might even feel a little superior to people in those earlier worldviews too. Like, oh, those conservatives, those fundamentalist Christians, like what the hell are they thinking? They're super deluded. But here's what's about to blow your mind. And it's this very insight that is going to help you unlock Tier 2 consciousness. And the insight is that you were blue once. You were orange once. And you didn't just leave blue and orange and all the previous stages behind. You actually integrated the most essential parts of them while transcending their limitations. And to talk about blue here, remember when you were a child and you had a desperate need to belong, to fit in with your family, your school, your community. Even if you weren't raised religious, you still absorbed the unquestioned rules of your tribe. Maybe it was your family's political views, your school's way of seeing and doing things, your friend group's particular habits. And you genuinely believed these were just the right ways, the correct ways. You looked at families and communities who did things differently and you thought they were just weird or wacky or whatever. But do you remember how terrifying it was to think differently from the group, to speak up and risk being rejected or cast out? Well, that's blue consciousness, and you once inhabited that mode as your primary stage of consciousness. But when you transcended that tribal absolutism, you likely kept the most essential gift that blue consciousness provides. Genuine moral conviction, the ability to feel in your bones that some things are right and some things are wrong, and that life has meaning and purpose. That's your blue foundation still operating in you today. Just now you hopefully don't have the need to fit everybody into a very narrow, very rigid tribal container. So today when you see various Republicans and Christians in America doubling down on their religious values and their own ethnocentricity as well, with them tightening up the border, it's all because they are so desperately trying to preserve their traditions. They're unwilling to see beyond the unquestioned values of their tribe, and their level of development just simply hasn't allowed them to do that yet. So do you see how the fundamental function of this stage of development is like belongingness to a tribe? It's a very communally oriented stage. And so that's what blue's fundamentally doing. They're not willing to let go and individuate into orange, and they're staying within this very tribal, very narrow worldview that's keeping them in ethnocentricity, that's tightening up the borders. Do you see like how this worldview is playing out in the world? And so now talking about orange, your journey into this stage may have looked different depending on your background. Maybe you had a more dramatic liberation moment, breaking free from religious or traditional family expectations and then feeling the liberation of intellectual awakening, using science and rationality to move past the superstitious beliefs of your previous tribe. But maybe your path was much smoother. Perhaps your parents and your culture already valued science, rationality, and individual critical thinking, so the development felt maybe a bit smoother if that was your case in your family. But either way, you inhabited this stage when you began to believe in the power of your individual mind, where you believed that hard work and smart thinking held the keys to your personal success, where you felt confident that science, rationality, and logic could solve most problems, and where you really felt that you could begin to self-author your life with these capacities. For me, I remember when I was around 11 or 12 years old, I had become really, really, really obsessed with science. And I would often watch scientific atheist versus religious debates and just kind of laugh with a chuckle of intellectual superiority over how dumb I thought the beliefs of the religious people were. This was like the kind of like early orange consciousness for me. And then it continued this more mature orange drive within me when I had freed myself from the script of what culture wanted me to do and decided to pursue a very different career and way of living from most people. And so this orange stage of development allowed for a lot. It liberated humanity from thousands of years of oppressive conformity. The advent of science and logic and rationality just allowed for a crazy amount of innovation to take place, innovation that essentially doubled the average human lifespan. It allowed democracy and individual rights to have a more strong hold in the collective. And this was really, really, really important and so huge. And really without orange, we would still be in a literal medieval feudalism as a species. And so, you will forever carry these tools of individuation and self-authorship and logical, rational thinking within you, but eventually you butt up against the limitations of too much individualism. Maybe you achieved some major goals, but you still felt empty and very hollow inside. Perhaps the excessive focus on material success and being overly scientific in your worldview has left you spiritually hungry. Maybe you see how staunch individualism and progress has been destroying the biosphere, and how this whole mindset doesn't ultimately solve systems of oppression such as racism and classism, and capitalism creates all this wealth inequality. And the realization of all of this births green consciousness within you, which I am willing to bet you strongly stand in today, or at least see the value of. Now, you probably see how blue and orange have been operating in a way that has put humanity in danger, electing people with authoritarian tendencies, contributing to the climate crisis, rampant capitalism, which is a byproduct of orange, by the way. And this system has perpetuated greed and has caused severe wealth inequality. And in a lot of ways, you might feel morally superior to them in your current state of consciousness and think, hey, if only they thought and behaved like me, the world would be a better place. But don't you see how the shift to seeing the entire collective field as expressions of different developmental stages changes everything? Because suddenly you're not just looking at a world full of deluded, evil, or selfish people who are just choosing to be harmful. You're looking at a world full of human beings who are doing the very best that they can based on their current level of consciousness development. You know, that diehard MAGA Trump supporter isn't merely wrong, they're expressing a developmental stage that you yourself once inhabited, working through essential human lessons around belonging, moral certainty, and tribal identity that every human needs to integrate. The hyper-capitalist entrepreneur isn't just greedy. In a strange way, their psyche is undergoing crucial developmental work around individual agency, rational thinking, and personal responsibility that our species had to learn in order to break free from tribal thinking. This doesn't mean that the harm they are causing to the world and to the biosphere is okay. It doesn't excuse the destruction that is being caused. I mean, all of that still really needs to be called out. We need that to be called out. But it changes how you hold them in your mind. And it changes the solutions that we as a species hold when it comes to bringing about a more harmonious, peaceful society. It becomes not just about converting them to your green egalitarian worldview, which still looks at the world and says, hey, if everyone just thought and behaved like me, the world would be perfect. But instead, the process of creating a more beautiful society becomes about helping each individual meet their developmental needs and move through the progressing stages of consciousness in the most healthy, harmonious manner possible. Green does a lot of shaming of orange and blue in hopes of getting them to simply convert to their worldview. So even though green's values might express a greater concern for all people and of all of life, they are still a tier 1 stage in that they still think that their worldview is simply the right or the correct one, and thus they can't really comprehend the whole developmental web of life. And this has consequences when it comes to interacting with other worldviews and trying to just create general harmony within a society. So the insight with tier 2 is that development is a real thing. And the moment that you truly see this, you can grasp this viscerally in a sort of aha sort of moment where you recognize the developmental necessity behind every worldview, including your own, everything shifts. You stop being at war with other people, you stop trying to simply convert people, and you can meet them where they are. You stop seeing enemies, and you start seeing the juicy process of consciousness evolution manifesting itself throughout the species. And it is precisely this shift that represents the moving into tier 2 consciousness. And so tier 2 consciousness, and again, there's a lot to say here, at the real core and crux of it, is about the movement from being your worldview to having worldviews. In other words, you're no longer fused to your beliefs, but rather you become much more interested in the space in which beliefs and worldviews arise in the first place. In this, you can see all of your previous selves, all the previous worldviews and beliefs you had, along with those of other people, and hold all of them in a broader, more open, more free, more expansive, more flexible identity. You can see and intuitively feel that all perspectives are partial, including that of your own. So you take yourself just a little less seriously, and you stop defending your worldview like it's life or death. But of course, you can see that some perspectives and some worldviews are more partial, more fragmented, and ultimately perpetuating more harm than others. And so you consider them just a little bit less. And simultaneously, you realize that having the least partial and most inclusive worldview and sense of identity that you possibly can is both the most truthful and the most loving way of going about things. And so you seek to have an as integrated worldview as possible, one that can consider and honor the truths of all schools of thought and all of the various developmental stages. This might not seem like a huge leap, but to move deeply into it, not just on a cognitive, intellectual level, but on a visceral, somatic, lived experience level, is literally like making a quantum leap in consciousness, a leap that is as big as the moving from blue traditional structures of consciousness into orange modernity structures of consciousness, or as big as the leap from moving from orange modernity, very individualistic and capitalistic modes of consciousness, into more egalitarian, more green, more postmodern structures of consciousness. And I would actually argue that the leap into tier 2 is actually even bigger than the transitions between each of those stages, because there's something that's inherently spiritual about this moving into tier 2. Again, there's tier 2 as just an intellectual or cognitive endeavor, which is how you probably first come to touch upon tier 2 consciousness. But then as you go deeper into it, there's the lived, visceral experience of it. And this becomes a deeply, deeply spiritual thing when it gets to a certain point. You know, to truly deeply inhabit a tier 2 level of consciousness is to have a direct, visceral recognition that you are not separate from evolution itself. You are a living, breathing manifestation of the very same intelligence and evolutionary force that ignited the Big Bang, that sculpted galaxies from cosmic dust, that birthed our solar system and birthed life onto this tiny little planet that we have come to call Earth. The same creative intelligence that guided the first spark of consciousness in single-celled organisms that complexified into bacteria and then to algae and then to entire forests, from primitive creatures to the emergence of now the complex Homo sapien. That same evolutionary force is pulsing through your veins right now. It is living through you, as you. You are the force of evolution. And now, here you stand, inhabiting the body of the most complex and sophisticated organism in the known universe. And you might just be thinking, well, isn't what you've just said here, isn't just this like the scientific orange creation story? And yes, an orange person would think of a creation story similar to this, but I'm getting at something different and far more profound than that. And so as the visceral knowing of this permeates your entire being, you no longer experience yourself as just an individual human being. You're no longer just Mike or Sarah or Chris trying to solve your individual problems and reach your individual personal goals. Rather, you start experiencing yourself more as a trans individual, an individual expression of the entire cosmos itself. Again, this isn't just like a cognitive recognition. It's very easy to recognize this cognitively, actually, but it is viscerally felt. It plunges open your identity. It dissolves your ego structures and really, really makes you embrace more of life, makes you embrace all beings, and makes you embrace more and more parts of yourself, and really, really just love all of them on a deeper level than you had ever been capable of before. To move deeply into tier 2 is to become aware of the telos of the cosmos, the movement of life and consciousness towards greater complexity, understanding, freedom, wholeness, and dare I say, love. Because understanding equals love. You can't really love something unless you can really see it for what it is. So with tier 2 consciousness being activated, you now see yourself as serving a duty to the cosmos, that you must fulfill your evolutionary destiny within the larger unfolding of reality. You realize that to turn your back on this movement towards greater liberation, freedom, wholeness, and love would be to turn your back on the very unfolding of the evolution of the cosmos, which I just, for myself, feel comfortable calling God. Of course, I don't think God is a man in the sky like fundamentalists do. I see God as all of creation and as the movement of consciousness towards this greater complexity, wholeness, liberation, and love. And so I view the turning back on this movement, which represents the cowering into fear, the cowering into ego, I see turning my back on that, turning my back on the movement towards what I've said, greater unity, greater wholeness, freedom, and love as literally turning my back on God. And why would I ever want to do that? Why would anybody ever want to do that? So in Tier 2, you enter into a completely new paradigm that is based on love rather than fear. And I don't mean love in this feel-good, airy-fairy sense. I mean love in the sense of evolutionary intelligence itself. A love that can be fierce and ruthless when it needs to be, as well as tender and soft and accepting when that's what the moment calls for. This is the love that will tell you the brutal truth about yourself because it sees your highest potential. This is the love that will challenge your comfortable beliefs and shatter your ego structures because it knows you're capable of being so much more. This is the love that says no to what keeps you small and contracted and in fear, and yes to what calls you towards your fullest expression. And this can be beautiful and also very, very, very painful and dark at times. And so a real deep visceral moving into Tier 2 can feel like an awakening. It's a very, very, very spiritual thing. And so like any transition into a new stage, the movement into Tier 2 is psychoactive. Just like when you take a psychoactive drug, your perception of reality and your way of seeing is different. So too does your perception of reality change when you move into a new stage structure of consciousness. And so with the movement into Tier 2, it becomes psychoactive in the sense that you become radically multidimensional and radically multi-perspectival in your awareness. Where you once saw evil, deluded idiots and assholes, you now see different developmental currents expressing themselves. Where you once were trying to win arguments and be considered correct and righteous, you now simply seek to understand and see the larger evolutionary unfolding rather than just simply trying to win the argument. You begin to feel and intuit the larger ecology of life in all waking moments, and you develop these wizard-like abilities where you can predict exactly how someone will react based on their level of awareness, where you can sense what they need to hear in order to actually have them listen and open to you rather than have them close off from you and become defensive. You become incredibly skilled at speaking different developmental languages, meeting blue consciousness in their need for tradition and belonging, orange in their drive for individuation, achievement, success, and logic, green in their values of social justice, equity, and inclusion, all while you never abandon your own truth, your own edge, but using all of these different languages and perspectives as tools in service of whatever the moment requires. And so your capacity for understanding, for empathy, and compassion increases dramatically because you see yourself in all of the prior stages. And where you once felt frustrated and angry at people's ignorance, you now feel a deep tenderness for the human developmental journey itself, seeing everyone as trying their best from their current level of awareness. Yet your empathy and tenderness doesn't mean you become passive when it comes to the world's issues and you don't cease to take action. Rather, you become even more strategic, far more effective, and far more intuitive in your actions. You develop an ability to really deeply listen to all of life and make your decisions and take actions, not primarily from the active outward pushing striving mentality of your ego, but from a deeper place within you, from your being, from the part of you that is interconnected with and at one with all of life, and allowing life to move you as it so desires. And so your ego in this starts to become less and less part of the equation, and more of your spirit begins to shine through in this. And so all of this can take various different forms. This can take the form of being a sword, cutting through illusion, deception, and complacency. And other times it can be a very warm, open-hearted attunement to the other. Again, it's whatever the moment requires, and you have a very keen, sharp awareness of what the moment requires. But all right, guys. So what I have described here in the recent depictions in the last couple minutes or so with the more spiritual stuff is the more mature and integrated form of Tier 2, which most developmental models call stage turquoise. This is a description of the very, very, very cutting edge of humanity, with less than 0.1% of humans fully inhabiting the stage according to a variety of research, but most people are going to be in the teal or the yellow stages of Tier 2. Teal and yellow are synonymous, by the way. Some models call it teal, some models call it yellow, but either way, these represent the emergence of Tier 2 into a human. And various descriptions say between 2 and 7% of the world has entered into at least a yellow/teal Tier 2 mode of consciousness, where you begin to see the world through developmental eyes, but you're still primarily operating from a more cognitive, heady, intellectual understanding of these things rather than the full, embodied, visceral, somatic, spiritual integration that Turquoise has. So in Teal/Yellow, you've made the crucial leap of recognizing that all worldviews are partial and that development moves through predictable stages, but you're still somewhat in your head about it all. You can analyze and categorize different levels of consciousness. You understand the theory brilliantly. You can have a very strong systems awareness. You can see the large picture of life, very deeply. And you've definitely transcended the need to be right in the way that Tier 1 sages do. And you definitely are beginning to open to and hold all parts of yourself. You definitely are more open and more free and less defensive and less rigid in your orientation towards life and towards people. You care. You have a lot of empathy, and your circle of concern has expanded a lot, but you haven't fully surrendered into being moved by the very evolutionary intelligence itself. And by the way, with this surrendering to and being moved by the evolutionary intelligence we're touching upon the states of complete ego transcendence, of enlightenment and nirvana and non-dualism that is so often talked about in many of the more esoteric spiritual traditions. And so that's another huge quantum leap from Yellow and Teal. And I'm not going to speak too much about that here. Really what's going to be relevant to you are the more Yellow, Teal domains here. Those refer to when you're just beginning to realize this stuff and you're moving towards your being needs, what Maslow calls being needs, rather than deficient needs. And your orientation towards life is beginning to shift to the orientation of how you can serve the larger planetary evolutionary unfolding rather than just trying to get your personal needs met and solve your individual problems and have your individual success. And so instead of asking questions like, how do I get what I want? Or what should I do in life? The Tier 2 human starts to ask things like, how can I serve? And what wants to emerge through me? You see how that type of question, what's trying to emerge through me, is getting at what is the intelligence of life trying to speak through me? That's what the Tier 2 human is beginning to ask. And as I say this, it kind of brings up this notion and brings up the question that maybe you have. And so maybe some of you are thinking, doesn't green do this? Doesn't green want to serve the larger evolutionary unfolding and the greater ecology of life? And the answer is yes, they certainly do. But green still believes that their particular vision of what service and noble living should look like is the right way for all people. They want to dismantle oppressive systems. They want to usher in greater social justice, equity, equality, and environmental sustainability, but they're still doing so in a way that is just trying to convert others to their worldview. And this doesn't really work effectively. So basically what green lacks is the awareness that development is a real thing, and actually a lot of green consciousness will actively deny the reality of development, especially higher development, out of existence, because green has a huge problem with hierarchies. Green thinks hierarchy equals oppression, and they are totally right in calling out the dominator hierarchies that have been oppressive, the capitalist hierarchies, all of the racial hierarchies, the gender hierarchies. They're very, very great at calling that out. This is a very great function that green serves, but in this they also throw growth hierarchies such as these integral developmental models out the window too. So the baby goes out with the bathwater and green flattens the landscape and falls into the pattern of just trying to convert others to their worldview and sees all who don't think and act like them as just wrong, as evil, as selfish, delusional, harmful, racist, sexist, classist, narcissistic, whatever word you want to throw in there. And Tier 2 with Teal transcends this by recognizing development, seeing the larger developmental picture of life, seeing the larger evolutionary patterns unfolding and serving the developmental process itself rather than vying for any specific ideological outcome. And so instead of trying to make everyone think like green about social justice and climate change, Teal recognizes that lasting transformation happens when you help blue find healthier expressions of belonging and meaning, when you support orange in individuating in a more healthy way, and when you assist green in becoming more practically effective rather than just more righteous. And so Teal serves evolution's natural unfolding rather than trying to force everyone into their preferred way of thinking and seeing things. Teal understands that a blue person who becomes a healthier, more inclusive blue is often more valuable to the world than a blue or orange person who's just been shamed into pretending and acting like green. I personally really like blue people in a lot of ways, this more traditional structure of consciousness. I at least like it until we get into political debates. But I deeply admire blue's strong commitment to family, to do good by oneself, by their loved one, and by their neighbors. When I think of blue, I think of my grandfather. And although he can only see in me as much as he's unlocked in himself, I can tell that he really loves me and that he really cares about me. His warrior-like capacities and his care for his family is something I really, really deeply admire about him. And it's something that I seek to integrate more into my life. And even though that I have cognitively moved well into tier 2, I think of Orange, I think of some of my friends and family who are very disciplined and hardworking. They've created amazing careers and amazing lives for themselves through their hard work. They've picked themselves up by the bootstraps, as the capitalist saying would say, and they're living great lives as a result of all of the capacities that I'm speaking of. And I'm seeking to integrate these myself. When I think of green, I think of some of my ex-girlfriends, how caring and how compassionate and how sensitive they were to the various injustices in the world, to the oppression that is taking place and all the subtleties of how this oppression takes place. They certainly have helped me integrate that and become more sensitive myself. And I think that green sensitivity is very important and is sadly something a lot of men resist because they view that as unmasculine. When in actuality, sensitivity and emotional openness, when you couple it with capacities from earlier stages like commitment to family, hard work and discipline, logical thinking, actually makes you a more integrated, moving into tier 2 man, the types of men that the world fucking need more of. So this is why tier 2 can work with anyone at any stage. They're not trying to simply convert people. They're trying to help consciousness itself evolve through its natural developmental progression in the healthiest and most harmonious manner possible. So do you recognize how big of a shift this is? I mean, so many of the problems that our world faces, what many have come to call the meta crisis, which is referring to the various intersecting global crises that our species faces. I'm talking the threat of ecological catastrophe as a result of climate change and mass pollution, the threat of nuclear war, the threat of what AI could mean for our species, the political polarization and the borderline fascist uprisings that have been taking place, alienation from community, the huge wealth gap between the rich and the poor, so many crises. And could we possibly reach a more harmonious outcome of this meta crisis from a place of tier 1 consciousness? I don't think so. Tier 2 actually allows for a big picture seeing of self and life and reality. A crisis that is this pervasive and this meta in nature is going to be best met with tier 2 consciousness. So that's why it's essential for more and more people to be entering into tier 2. And so that's why it's a key mission in my life to talk more about this stuff, make it more understandable and more digestible to the masses, and also embody it myself and coach people through their own developmental issues too. And also just guys, collective issues aside, when you enter into tier 2, you just become more open and more free and more happy. You develop this inner spaciousness and you stop wasting so much energy getting triggered and getting reactive, and you stop wasting so much time doing things that just aren't very good for you. You get more real with life while simultaneously getting more playful with it. Your inner landscape just in general becomes a lot healthier in tier 2 because you're not at war with yourself so much. So much of tier 1 is just being at war with yourself, trying to get your deficient needs of love and belonging and esteem met. And these are all very, very important needs, but now moving into tier 2, you can really self-actualize and self-transcend and become who the fuck you're meant to become and serve the world to your very, very fullest capacity. Don't you see how fucking valuable this is? I'm making this video and talking about this to fire you the fuck up about your life, to get you to stop sleepwalking, stop living just for your own petty personal gain, open to more of life. Of course, if you want to live for your personal petty gain, you can do that. I'm not going to stop you. Be my guest. But I know you're not here at this point in the video wanting to sleepwalk, wanting to not play some sort of role in uplifting the species and uplifting the earth, because that's what you fully step into in tier 2. Like, I know that you don't just find yourself here in this human body with these hands, with this mind that thinks things. Like, this is all just really, really mysterious. And I know that you watching this, you're not just here to like sleepwalk. And I know if you're listening to this, you know that there's something very sacred to your existence and you want to get in touch with that. And that's why you're interested in tier 2. And so that's why I'm firing you up about this. So anyways, I'm going to tone down the fire a little bit and I'll give you some more practical advice on how you more deeply can make the jump into tier 2. And if you're watching this video and picking up on this stuff, your consciousness is kind of like already orbiting around this already. You're already like close in a way. There's some current within you that's intuiting that this thing I'm talking about is what is next for you. But there's lots of practical advice to give, so that's what I'll speak on next. So anyways, to move into tier 2, like this is like the most important thing what I'm about to say here. You're first going to have to step into a natural state of curiosity, openness, and develop an inquisitive and generally non-defensive relationship to your experience, your perspectives, your worldview, and with life. This is the most important thing. The human developmental process is largely a process of openness and expansion of self. Bring in new perspectives, new ways of seeing things, and then integrating that greater complexity together. And so naturally, the most important thing you're going to need is an open mind and also an open heart too, because without a general state of openness, you're going to be more closed to any new input, and thus the developmental process will be stunted within you. You know, the reason that blue religious fundamentalists and staunch scientific atheists and rampant capitalists get stuck in their worldview and appear so selfish and closed off is because they don't live from a state of curiosity and openness. They think they know the answers and they seek to always prove that in whatever situation they encounter themselves in. So develop a curious and open relationship with life and also learn to be okay with not knowing. The human ego craves certainty because certainty makes the ego feel safe. And it's always scary to be groundless and be in the unknown in life, yet you'll have to cultivate the capacity to be with the unknown and explore the unknown, even when things get painful and difficult. You'll have to become very aware of your experience. You'll need to be able to recognize when your ego is filling in the gap of knowing with some random belief and not get too attached to that belief as well. You'll need to get really fucking good at asking questions too, high quality questions. This is the relationship with life that you need to have. You need to get curious and get open. And on a more specific level, start reading some of the theory. It will help you cognitively to get more acquainted with integral theory, spiral dynamics, and just other psychological developmental models. But in general, just intake a wide variety of perspectives. Don't just learn the models. The models are ultimately just maps, and the map is not the territory. Learn about psychology, learn about philosophy, spirituality, history, politics, physics, science. Get a lay of the entire land and get a lot of breadth of knowledge, but then also seek a lot of depth as well. Listen to books, listen to podcasts, watch educational YouTube videos like this one. Just really, really, really intake a lot. Another thing you'll have to do is shadow work. The human developmental process requires waking up, growing up, and cleaning up, aka shadow work, is probably the most overlooked out of all of these. Developing a generally curious and open and inquisitive relationship with yourself will aid immensely in shadow work, but in shadow work, you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper too. You're going to have to really love yourself and really hold a lot of compassion for yourself and hold all parts of yourself and dig inside yourself even when it gets painful to unearth and reintegrate the material that you've disowned along the various parts in your journey. I'm talking about things like getting in touch with your unconscious biases, your hidden motivations, the pain that's keeping you distracting yourself all the time with social media and porn and all of that stuff. All the stuff that you've banished to your unconscious because you've deemed it unacceptable to feel and have in your experience that you still subtly, intuitively know is affecting your experience and is closing down a deeper and more true and more intimate relationship with yourself and with all of life. This might mean facing the parts of yourself that are still blue. Maybe you discover you actually do crave belonging more than you've admitted to yourself. Or confronting your orange shadows. Perhaps you're still ultra competitive and super achievement oriented, yet your green identity is trying to hide this. So you may have to travel back to these earlier parts of yourself, pick them up, say, I see you, I hear you, and I love you. to them and make sure those parts of you are getting adequate attention and nourishment, and just see like what need that they're pointing towards. So shadow work is essential. You should do research and read a lot of books on that, because that's a super, super, super important part of the journey that I'm going to speak more on in future videos, because that's something that's really been at the forefront of my life lately and what I've learned a lot about in the past couple of years. But anyways, you'll also need to take part in practices that are actively expanding your consciousness. These are the realms of waking up, cultivating the capacity of mindfulness to just be with your present experience as it is without judgment. That's absolutely essential. Spending time in nature, which I find always leads to new insights and fresh perspectives, has been a super essential part of my journey. Taking long contemplative walks is also essential. And also I'll say this, even though to some that it may be pretty controversial, I believe psychedelic work can also enormously expand one's consciousness and make it easier to reach tier 2. I know that I wouldn't have been able to grasp tier 2 at this point in my life without psychedelics, so I'm very, very grateful for the existence of these substances. And if you watch the video that I will post next week, I'll actually be telling the story of the psychedelic experience that changed my life forever. This one really changed everything for me. It actually literally showed me the potentiality of tier 2 consciousness in my direct experience, and it showed me this direction that consciousness is moving towards, like I've said, greater wholeness, freedom, harmony, integration, and again, I dare say it, love. Consciousness is moving towards love, more love. Yet, there's also a lot of traps to doing psychedelics. I don't feel like speaking a lot on that part right now, but I'll just say do a lot of research and be very careful before you decide on that method for yourself. I'll speak more on this topic in future videos, but the crux of what I'm saying is that you need practices that just begin to blur and even actually dissolve the boundaries between you, your own ego, and life itself. Like, this is part of the opening process. Self and other need to sort of begin to blur and merge and blend together, because at the end of the day, your ego is just a construct. It's just an idea that you have bought into. You've labeled something in reality as me and other stuff as not me. And you've gone on your life defending and serving what you've labeled as me your whole life, when in reality, it's just a contract that you bought into in order to survive that has actually no inherent truthfulness. There's no inherent truth value to it. This is important because when you begin to see through the illusion of self, you stop being so rigid and so defensive, and you stop protecting your own identity so strongly, which you realize was just an imaginary construct. And so when you wake up and your sense of self expands, you can just hold more of life, you can care for more of life, and that's really what's happening as you move up the various stages. You express greater care for more and more of the cosmos, because you realize you are the fucking cosmos. You are all of life. Now, I know that might sound like a little bit weird, hopefully it makes some sort of sense, but all of this, and then moving into tier 2, it becomes a lot easier when you make openness a top value in your life. Openness of mind, openness of heart, openness of spirit, openness to new experience. Of course, you need some healthy, conservative, contractive instincts as well. I'm not saying completely open yourself. You got to do this in kind of a manner that's not super destabilizing. I'll throw that in there. But I was saying generally, if you keep opening more of this stuff will begin to make sense in time, and you'll become more integrated. Yet it's also important to also talk about the traps to this tier 2 stuff. The one that's at the forefront of my mind when it comes to tier 2 as a concept is that thinking about this stuff can just really usher in a strong sense of religiosity. It can feel amazing to be a part of this cool tier 2 movement in consciousness. Oh my God, I'm in the top 5% of humanity, or something like that is what you might think. I certainly thought that for a little bit. And while it's good to have some sense of healthy pride in being a part of this, it can also lead to feelings of superiority. When you learn about development, you never really see the world the same way again. The map kind of gets downloaded into your brain, and you'll probably find yourself just labeling everyone in your life as a certain color. And this can be harmful and can lead you to adopting overly simplistic, overly reductionistic explanations of people and situations. And you can kind of just be quick to write people off as being more immature and less developed than you, leading you to not take them or what they have to say very seriously. I certainly did this when I first learned about development and all this tier 2 stuff. And this is common for people just learning about this stuff to use it in order to position themselves as higher or as more superior than other people. But I've matured on my own journey a lot. I've done some shadow work on myself. And I've realized that I, and really anybody, still has material to integrate from the lower stages. I said that story earlier of admiring the warrior energy and family values of my grandpa, and the hardworking, punctual nature of some of my friends, and the sensitivity of my ex-girlfriend, because they are all examples of people who have capacities that I seek to integrate, that are capacities that come online in the tier 1 stages. I never fully developed some of those capacities in myself, and so that's why I admire them, and even sometimes I experience slight envy of them, even though in my cognition I have moved into tier 2. You know, cognition is typically the first line of development that reaches tier 2, and then as you go about your journey, you continue to become more emotionally and more somatically integrated, as well as more interpersonally and more morally intelligent, and so that you really start embodying this stuff in a really, really full spectrum way. So I'm basically saying this to encourage that if you do find yourself with this sort of like superiority complex, like a lot of people do, maybe even most people do when they first hear about this stuff, you know, dig into that, question that, and also try to find a lesson that each person, each situation can tell you. Because I guarantee you hold shadows that if you inquired into that shadow could reveal something very, very valuable to you. And like really just like don't fall into the trap of bypassing, especially spiritual bypassing, of the necessary emotional and psychological work that needs to be done. You know, don't develop the Messiah complex where you try to save and develop everyone and become overly preachy with this stuff either. At the end of the day, you should just meet people where they are at, not always be trying to take them where you think they should develop. The models provide the map, but it's not your job to always try to make people develop like how you think the map should go. If people express a curiosity and openness to growth and more understanding, perhaps you could be there to help them and help guide them. But most of the time, your job is to just model your own maturity, live your own life, and let your own light create its own impact on people. It's like, okay, cool. You can think in a tier 2 way. Now, are you going to go live your life purpose, find your niche, and use this consciousness to go mend an ache within the world? Are you going to do that? Or are you going to just sit there waving your tier 2 flag, thinking you're so cool because you can think in a tier 2 way? The purpose of getting to this point in consciousness is so that you can go make love to the world more powerfully and more fully than you could before. At the end of the day, guys, life is just an infinite game of embodying ever deepening levels of love. Love is the name of the game. It's what it's all about. So take all of this information and go make love to the world. That's how you are going to make this life the most beautiful, amazing one it can be for yourself. And it's also how we are going to collectively move past the meta crisis that is our present day. There's a reason this tier 2 consciousness is emerging. And that's because our species has become increasingly global in nature. We have global problems, we have complex, intersecting, multidimensional global problems, and it's only humans that can hold all of this complexity and integrate it into the worldview that are going to be most effective in solving these problems. So take this stuff and go make love to the world, guys. That's all I really have to say here. It's really my main message of the video. And if you want to get a more comprehensive understanding of this stuff, you know, go read the authors that I mentioned earlier in the video. You can see my 1-hour video on the stages of consciousness, where I go through everything stage by stage. If you want to bring this stuff practically into your everyday life practice and your routines, you can see my video titled The Ultimate Blueprint of Personal Development. These are just some videos to spur you further, but I will say that every video that I make is coming from this tier 2 system that has gradually been downloaded into my OS, my brain, over the past several years. So even if I'm not directly speaking about the theory of it, in my mind I'm always trying to illuminate more and more and more of the picture in some way. Like all of my videos are meant to like build upon each other and illuminate more of the picture. But yeah, guys, this inner development, this inner psychological work is the work that I think is some of the most important and the most rewarding things that you can do with your life. In addition to getting more deeply in touch with your purpose, more intimate with your experience, you'll also likely find yourself just being happier and more in love and less in fear, less in defensive mindsets. You open more to life. It's one of the most rewarding things in life, I can say from experience. And if you yourself want to work with me personally in accelerating this process within you, I do offer coaching and mentoring. It's always my highest joy to see how this stuff plays out one-to-one with people. But you can see my website. You can see more info pinned in the comment section. on that. And maybe in the farther future, if you're watching this, then I'll have a new community offering where we can all gather and grow and talk about this stuff together. But that's all I'm going to say for this video. Go take this stuff and go make love to the world with it. Hope you all have a great day, and peace.